All right, it's time to do some Pathfinder studies. I'm going to re-record weapons because we did this live and the music was too loud in the background and nobody told me it was too loud until it was already over. And so I just read through everything and that was that. So, if you can hear any music at all, I've probably made it super low because I don't want it to overwrite what we're doing. Anyways, let's just jump into it. Weapons. Found in Chapter 6 of the core rulebook. Most characters in Pathfinder carry weapons ranging from mighty warhammers to graceful bows to even simple clubs. Full details on how you calculate the bonuses, modifiers, and penalties for attack rolls and damage rolls are covered in Chapter 9, but we've already covered that in our other study videos because we jump all over the place. Alright, attack rolls. When making an attack roll, determine the result by rolling a d20 and adding your attack modifier for the weapon or unarmed attack that you're using. Modifiers for melee and ranged attacks are calculated differently. Melee attack modifier is your strength modifier, or optionally your dexterity if you have a finesse weapon, plus your proficiency bonus plus other bonuses plus penalties. Ranged attack modifier is equal to your dexterity modifier plus your proficiency modifier plus other bonuses plus penalties. Bonuses and penalties apply to these rolls just like any other types of checks. Weapons with potency runes add an item bonus to your attack roll. And you can't stack those kinds of bonuses. So, if they've got the same typing, item and item and item, you take the best of those 3 item bonuses. Multiple attack penalty. As we all know by now, if you use an action with the attack trait more than once on the same turn, your attacks after the first take a penalty called a multiple attack penalty. Your second attack takes a -5. Any subsequent attacks take a -10 penalty. So you don't really make 3 attacks per round, usually. The multiple attack penalty doesn't apply to attacks you make when it isn't your turn, such as attacks made as part of a reaction. You can use a weapon with the agile trait to reduce your multiple attack penalty. So if you do like attacking a lot, rangers are very good at attacking a lot. They have a lot of abilities that mitigate attacking a lot. And I have discovered that fighters and rogues have a lot of really great abilities that allow them to make opportunity attacks when it is not their turn. In fact, there is a way to build your rogues so that they get 2 reactions that could be spent for counterattacks or sort of attacks of opportunity. Keep in mind that when you make an attack of opportunity or a reaction-based attack, it has no penalty because it's the first attack that you have made in that particular sequence, because it's not a part of your turn. It's happening at a different time in the round. So that's a great way to get around the multiple attack penalty if you are excited about attacking a lot. So look into fighters, rogues, and rangers, and monks if you like attacking a lot. Damage rolls. When the result of your attack roll with a weapon or unarmed attack equals or exceeds your target's AC, you hit your target. Roll the weapon or unarmed attack's damage die and add the relevant modifiers, bonuses, and penalties to determine the amount of damage you deal. Calculate a damage roll as follows. Melee damage roll is equal to damage die of weapon or unarmed attack plus strength modifier plus bonuses plus penalties. Range damage roll is equal to damage die of weapon plus strength modifier for thrown weapons plus bonuses plus penalties. You might have noticed that there is no dexterity bonus to your range damage rolls. That is for equity's sake. It is easier and safer to make ranged attacks. So they want to reward people who are using action economy to move into melee, stay in melee, and risk being in melee by giving them extra damage. Ranged weapons don't normally add an ability modifier to the damage roll, though weapons with the propulsion trait can add half your strength modifier, or your full modifier if it happens to be a negative number. And thrown weapons add your full strength modifier. Magic weapons with striking, greater striking, and major striking runes add 1 or more damage dice to your damage roll. These extra dice are the same dice size as the weapon's damage die. At higher levels, most characters also gain extra damage from weapon specialization. What about critical hits? Well, everything critically hits in Pathfinder 2e. Weapons, of course, no different. When you make an attack and succeed with a natural 20, the number on the die shows a 20, or if the result of your attack exceeds the target's AC by 10, you achieve a critical success, also known as a critical hit. Now keep in mind, it says that you have to attack and succeed. So a level 1 kobold attacking a level 20 dragon, even if it gets a natural 20, does not actually get a critical hit because there's just no way it is ever going to be able to hit the armor class of that dragon. Unarmed attacks. Almost all characters start out trained in unarmed attacks. You can strike with your fist or another part of your body, calculating your attack and damage rolls in the same way you would with a weapon. Unarmed attacks can be long to a weapon group, and they might have weapon traits. However, unarmed attacks aren't weapons, and effects and abilities that work with weapons never work with unarmed attacks unless they specifically say so. And this is mostly to clarify that you couldn't take magical runes and use them on your fist to make them into magical weapons. You couldn't use something like Flame Blade enchantment and suddenly you have flaming hands. It's mostly to clarify that kind of stuff. But a lot of weapons will go into like the brawling group. That is a pretty common place for unarmed attacks to go. Table 6.6 Unarmed Attacks lists the statistics for an unarmed attack with a fist, though you'll usually use the same statistics for attacks made with any other part of your body. Certain ancestry feats, class features, and spells give access to special, more powerful unarmed attacks like horns, bites, claws, hooves. Details for those unarmed attacks are provided in the abilities that grant them. Improvised Weapons. If you attack with something that wasn't built to be a weapon, such as a chair or a vase, you're making an attack with an improvised weapon. You take a -2 item penalty to attack rolls with an improvised weapon. The GM determines the amount and type of damage the attack deals, if any, as well as any weapon traits the improvised weapon should have. Improvised weapons are simple weapons. This is very similar to 5th edition where you don't gain your proficiency bonus when attacking with an improvised weapon. So the -2 is sort of representing that it is unwieldy and you're not used to using it as a weapon. Weapon statistics. The tables on pages 280 and 282 list the statistics for various melee and ranged weapons that you can purchase, as well as the statistics for striking with a fist or another basic unarmed attack. The tables present the following statistics. All weapons listed in the chapter will have an item level of 0. So that is just saying anybody can buy or build these items. Selecting weapons. Characters who focus on combat need to carefully consider their choice of weapons, evaluating whether they want to fight in melee or at range, the weapon's damage potential, and the special features of various weapons. Characters who are primarily spellcasters usually just need to pick a backup weapon in the best category they're trained or better in. Now keep in mind, different characters are going to be proficient in different things. Some people are going to have heritage-based weapon groups that they have access to. Some are going to have classes from archetypes or dedications. Some, of course, all will have access to things based on their primary class. As you level up, you'll get better at certain weapons, but maybe not better at all weapons. And that's what they're saying, is you just always want to be using weapons that you have a tendency to be better with, because this is a game with some very tight math, and you're doing yourself a disservice if you're trying to use weapons that you're just not as skilled in. Especially when you consider that anything can cause a critical miss, critical fumbles, and you want to get all those critical hits. So the bigger your bonuses, the more likely you are to get them. So stick with what you're good at. When selecting weapons, start by identifying the weapon types you're trained or better in. You should then compare weapons within these types to determine which ones you will have the highest melee or ranged attack modifier with. It's usually considered best practice to select both a melee and a ranged weapon during character creation, so you can contend with a broader variety of foes and situations. Weapon categories. Weapons fall into broad categories depending on how much damage they deal and what traits they have. Martial weapons generally deal more damage than simple weapons, and advanced weapons generally have more advantageous traits than martial weapons with the same damage. Generally, you'll want to select weapons that deal more damage, but if you're a highly skilled combatant, you might want to pick a weapon with interesting traits, even if it has a lower weapon damage die. You can also purchase multiple weapons within your budget, allowing you to switch between them for different situations. Alright, what else can these things do? Damage. This entry lists the weapon's damage die and the type of damage it deals. B for bludgeoning, P for piercing, and S for slashing. Pretty classic. Damage dice. Each weapon lists the damage die used for its damage roll. A standard weapon deals 1 die of damage, but a magical striking rune can increase the number of dice rolled, as can some special actions and spells. These additional dice use the same die size as the weapon or unarmed attacks normal damage die. Counting damage dice. Effects based on a weapon's number of damage dice include only the weapon's damage die plus any extra dice from a striking rune. They don't count extra dice from abilities, critical specialization effects, property runes, weapon traits, or the like. Alright. Now, the cool thing about this is because your damage dice increase, not just the static number that you add to the dice, even if you're not a spellcaster, you get to throw a lot of dice around, and everybody likes rolling big fistfuls of dice, even if we're playing on VTT. You like seeing all those virtual dice clatter across the table. So I like how in Pathfinder 2, eventually your melee character or your ranged character could be dropping bombs, just big old fat stacks of dice, feeling like every punch is a fireball. It's very, very exciting. Increasing die size. When an effect calls for you to increase the size of your weapon damage dice, instead of using its normal weapon damage dice, you use the next larger die as listed. So if you're using a D4, it'd be a D6 and so on. If you're already using a D12, the size is already at maximum, which is very sad because it'd be really cool to roll a D20 for damage. You can't increase your weapon damage size more than once, and you will find that weapons don't have 2d6, they just have 1d12. So no more arguments about great sword versus great axe. A d12 is a d12. Range. Ranged and thrown weapons have a range increment. Attacks with these weapons work normally up to that distance. Attack rolls beyond a weapon's range increment take a -2 penalty for each additional multiple of that increment between you and the target. Attacks beyond the 6th range increment are impossible. For example, a short bow takes no penalty against a target up to 60 feet away, a -2 penalty against a target beyond 60 but up to 120, and a -4 penalty against a target beyond 120 but up to 180, and so on and so forth. It is doubtful you'll be on a map so big that you would ever need to worry about running out of range. This is in a way similar to what they've got in 5th edition, where you have your short range that you can fire up to that number without disadvantage, and then your long range, which is past short range, and then that's the maximum distance you could fire, but the shot will be at disadvantage. Of course, in 5th edition D&D, there's a number of feats and abilities you could take to just get rid of those penalties and trivialize them. In this, there's a bit more calculation. As you measure further and further out, the shot gets harder and harder to make. You might be able to make a shot that's really far away, but you're very unlikely to get a critical hit on a shot that's really, really far away. I like this, and I like how it scales, and I think it's pretty well done. Reload. While all weapons need some amount of time to get into position, many ranged weapons also need to be loaded and reloaded. This entry indicates how many interact actions it takes to reload such weapons. This can be 0 if drawing ammunition and firing the weapon are part of the same action, or if an item takes 2 or more actions to reload, the GM determines whether they must be performed together or as an activity, or you could spend some of those actions during one turn and the rest during your next turn. So when you go to build your character, you may want to check with your GM about how they handle reloads, and that may determine whether or not you want to play a build that is built around reloading. Because if they're very strict with the reload, and you can't start it and finish it the next turn, that's going to change the way the character plays. An item with an entry of dash must be drawn to be thrown, which usually takes an interact action just like drawing any other weapon. Reloading a ranged weapon and drawing a thrown weapon both require a free hand. Switching your grip to free a hand, and then to place your hand in the grip necessary to wield the weapon are both included in the actions you spend to reload a weapon. Just keep in mind that you do have to have that hand free to do all that stuff. Bulk. This entry gives the weapon's bulk. A weapon's bulk is increased or decreased if it's sized for creatures that aren't small or medium, following some rules somewhere else. Hands. Some weapons require one hand to wield and others require two. A few items such as the longbow list 1+ for its hands entry. That means you need one hand to hold it, but two hands to use it. You can hold a weapon with a +1 entry in one hand, but the process of shooting it requires a second hand to retrieve, nock, and loose an arrow. This means you can do things with your free hand while holding the bow without changing your grip, but the other hand must be free when you shoot. To properly wield a 1+ weapon, you must hold it in one hand and also have a hand free. Weapons requiring two hands typically deal more damage. Some one-handed weapons have the two-handed trait, causing them to deal a different size weapon die when used in two hands, like the Bastard Sword. In addition, some abilities require you to wield a weapon in two hands. You meet this requirement while holding the weapon in two hands, even if it doesn't require two hands or have the two-handed trait. Groups. A weapon or unarmed attack group classifies it with similar weapons. Groups affect some abilities and what the weapon does on a critical hit. If you have access to that weapon or unarmed attack's critical specialization effects, which are unlocked generally by class feats, but sometimes by other things. Weapon traits. The traits of a weapon or unarmed attack the traits a weapon or unarmed attack has are listed in this entry. Any trait that refers to a weapon can also apply to an unarmed attack that has that trait. Ammunition. Some entries in the ranged weapons table are followed by an entry indicating the type of ammunition that weapon launches. The damage die is determined by the weapon, not the ammunition. Because of that and other relevant statistics that vary by weapon, ammunition entries list only the name, quantity, price, and bulk, and any ammunition used is destroyed. There is no recovering any kind of ammunition, period. Weapon traits. Weapons and unarmed attacks with the weapon trait can have a number of traits found under Weapon Traits in the Traits section. And then we've got critical specialization effects. Certain feats, class features, weapon runes, and other effects can grant you additional benefits when you make a strike with certain weapons and get a critical success. This is called a critical specialization effect. The exact effect depends on which weapons group your weapon belongs to, as listed here. You can always decide not to add the critical specialization effect of your weapon. Alright, so we're going to stop right here. And then we're going to pick up talking about traits of the weapons. So I'll see you in next time, and we'll talk about the traits of weapons.